5 years after leaving G8, Russia's G20 future is in question. On 24th March 2014, 7 members of the G8 cancelled the planned summit that was supposed to be held in Sochi, Russia, after Putin ordered the attack on Crimea. However, Russia wasn't instantly expelled. On 13th January 2017, Moscow announced its permanent withdrawal from the G8 before it could get expelled for its actions in Crimea 3 years prior. Later in the video, I will tell you who is most likely to replace Russia in the G20, but first let's focus on Russian issue. A senior G7 source said if Russia remains a member of the G20, it will become a less useful organization. That's a clear sign that the EU and USA want Russia out. Moreover, an article published in Reuters claims that European Union has made very clear to Indonesia that Russia's presence at the upcoming meeting would be highly problematic for the European countries. This statement was made given that the next summit will be held in Bali, and Biden made a very important comment during a press conference in Brussels following a NATO meeting. He said that he wants Russia out of the G20. This move would also further isolate Moscow and diminish Russian influence over the world economy. Additionally, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison called sitting with Putin in Bali a step too far and claimed to have discussed the issue directly with the Indonesian president. But the US or Australia does not have sole power to remove Russia from the group. So, who will replace Russia as the new member of the G20? Poland has nominated itself. Moreover, Poland said it had suggested to the US officials that it looks to replace Russia within the G20 group, and Poland even stated that the suggestion had received a positive response. In a Twitter post, the Polish Development and Technology Minister Nowak said, by invading Ukraine, Russia violated the principles of international cooperation, which is a basis for its exclusion from the organization that guaranteed international economic and financial stability. Today, there is no place for Russia in the G20. The Polish minister added that as the world's second fastest growing country over the past 30 years, Poland certainly deserves a place in the G20. According to the World Bank data for 2020, Poland is the 21st biggest economy in the world. But it's not that easy to remove Russia out of G20. A high-level G7 source said it was seen as unlikely that Indonesia, currently heading the G20, or members like India, Brazil, South Africa and China would agree to remove Russia from the group. Some experts even said that it's impossible to remove Russia from G20 unless Moscow makes such a call on its own. Now the question is that, is there a procedure to kick out a country of the G20? And the answer is, there's simply no procedure to disqualify Russia of the G20 membership. Later in the video, I will explain why European countries were requesting Russia to join the G8 back and what were the G7 countries missing without Russia. But first, let's see China's stance. China's foreign ministry spokesperson said that no member has the right to remove another country as a member. And as I said earlier, there is no procedure to kick out a country out of the G20, as it has never happened before. Furthermore, China has backed Russia's presence in the G20, calling it an important member. But at the same time, Joe Biden has come up with an out-of-the-box idea, and he says if Indonesia and others do not agree, then we should ask Ukraine to attend the G20 meeting. And keep it in mind, Ukraine is not a part of G20, so the Europeans and Americans are calling it a very clever move by President Biden. China, on the other hand, has pushed Indonesia to keep Ukraine off the G20 summit. Xi Jinping, a former diplomat, claims that Beijing is asking Indonesia to keep the issue of conflict off the table at the upcoming meeting in Bali and instead focus on economic issues. But will Russia be attending the G20 conference, or will it opt out on its own? At the last G20 summit held in Rome, Putin did not attend the summit in person. He joined via a video call. Russia's diplomat to Indonesia said that the Russian president intends to attend the G20 summit in Indonesia later this year. When asked if Russia should be excluded from the G20, she responded that it is a place for discussing economic matters and not a crisis like Ukraine. She even requested Indonesia not to be influenced by pressure from Western countries. Moreover, when discussing the G20 scenario, we cannot miss an important point and how the Western world, including the countries from the European Union, were calling Russia back into the G8 after it left. Back in the day, Italian Foreign Affairs Minister Federica requested Russia to renew its G8 membership. And in April 2014, the German Foreign Minister Frank Walter said none of the major international conflict can be solved without Russia, so Russia should come back. Even the Japanese wanted Russia back to solve the crisis in Middle East. But there is one major option left with the Western world to show their stand, and that is if Russia will come, then we won't. If G7 countries were to skip this year's G20 meeting, that could be a powerful signal to Russia, China, and Indonesia. Right now, the question is, does Russia even care about the G group? The current and historic statement that came from Moscow shows that Russia is not too worried about exclusion from the G group. In 2017, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei said that Russia's resignation from the G8 would have little impact because all economic and financial matters are decided in the G20 and the G8 only exists to serve as a forum for communication between the top Western countries and Russia. Now, however, we have Dmitry, the Russian president's press secretary, who claims that nothing awful will happen because most of the G20 countries are already fighting Russian economy. The G8 had started out as the G6 in 1975 with France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and the US. The idea was to bring together a coalition of the wealthiest liberal democracies. The group initially included only finance ministers and head of central banks who came together to discuss the global economy, but eventually evolved to include heads of states. Canada was added in 1976, making it the G7, and Russia in 1997, making it the G8. But what was the crisis that forced top countries to come together and form a unit? In July 1997, a financial emergency began in Thailand and quickly expanded across East Asia, causing spillover effects in Latin America and Eastern Europe. The group of G20 was founded in 1999 in reaction to the Asian financial crisis 2 years prior. The organization began with finance ministers and central bank heads meeting to discuss the global economy. And later G20 began holding its annual summit for heads of state in 2008. Now let's try to understand how G20 works and how is the G20 president country selected. Each year in December, a different G20 member country assumes the presidency of the group. The president is chosen through a system of rotation. The G19 along with the European Union makes the G20. They are divided into 5 groups consisting of a maximum of 4 states. The country groups are organized on a regional basis. That is, nations from the same region are usually placed in the same group. Only 2 groups differ from this regional approach. The group 1 is Australia, Canada, US and Saudi Arabia, and the group 2 is India, Russia, South Africa and Turkey. Every year the G20 selects a country from another group to be president. This principle was introduced in 2010 when South Korea held the G20 presidency. Within a group, all countries are eligible to take over the G20 presidency when it is their group's turn. Therefore, the states within the relevant group need to negotiate among themselves to select the next G20 president. Sometimes there are also intra-group negotiations about which country in the group should assume the next presidency. Therefore, for the 2018 presidency, it was Group 3's turn, with Argentina, Mexico and Brazil as contenders. Mexico had already hosted the summit in 2012, and since Brazil slid into a national crisis in 2016, it did not wish to take over the G20 presidency. Therefore, Argentina was chosen. Earlier, Indonesia criticized the conflict in Ukraine. However, it did not impose any sanctions on Russia. At the moment, it looks like that any attempt to isolate Moscow from the G20 would face opposition. However, we must remember that while countries use these various platforms to play politics, children in Ukraine continue to die.